Morning everyone. I need a haircut. I think I'm just looking at myself, which sort of panics me a bit really, given my history of hair cutting. Anyway, it's a lovely day, and I've been in the garden this morning, and I'm cultivating a wildflower patch. Cultivating is probably the wrong word, but anyway, each day I see a different flower or grass appearing, and some obviously would regard them as weeds, but there's such beauty in them, and they're so important, aren't they, for the bees and therefore for other flowers and fruits. And that's reminded me of the interdependence of God's creation. It's wonderful, isn't it, that everything has a purpose and everything is connected. Whether that's connected to what I'm going to say next is another matter. And this week I've been looking through some old comics that I have, mostly old Beanos and Dandies, which were my favourites, still are, not the modern one. But I also have one or two American comics, and I was struck by the heroes in these comics. The heroes in the American comics are very powerful, larger than life, set apart from us mere mortals, who they're sent to protect us from evil. Superman and Batman, Captain America, Spider-Man, etc. And then I look in the heroes in the Beano and the Dandy. Desperate Dan, the Bash Street Kids, Lord Snooty, Dennis the Menace, and so on. And they are mostly like us. I mean, for me, there's a lot of, it's like my working class culture in those comics. The only exception was Lord Snooty, but he had working class followers as well. And mostly, they're just like us. They're flawed. They're comic and ridiculous and get into scrapes, and they slip on banana skins, just like us. But they're comforting to me in the way that American superheroes could never be. Perhaps that might be something to do with me, or perhaps it's the difference between the American and British psyche. I don't know. The only thing I liked really about American comics were the adverts on the back, where I could see you could send for X-ray glasses that could see through clothes and walls. There's a little picture of somebody putting these glasses on, and this sort of cartoon of this woman, and you could see the outline underneath her clothes. I was a child. I have grown out of that now. But I yearned for these and was frustrated because I wanted them, and I had to send $2 to an address in the States. And I thought, I'm never going to be able to do that. You know, I couldn't work out how you would do that. And now I know how you would do that. A, the price of the the price of the X-ray specs have gone up. And B, thankfully, I'm not particularly interested now in seeing through clothes and walls. There's been a lot of talk about heroes, haven't there, these past few weeks, and the heroes on the front line against COVID-19, and suddenly there are heroes everywhere. Nurses and doctors, quite rightly, are up there, but also coming into that heroic category are people who wouldn't normally be considered heroic or even given a thought about their importance at all. The cleaners, the shop workers, the refuse collectors, and many others that we would normally take for granted, but really are essential to our well-being, that interdependence I talked of at the beginning. And when I officiate at funerals at Bushbury Crematorium, I now regularly meet with the cleaner there, because she cleans after every funeral. So I will see her, and I'd never seen her before, but now we chat regularly. And she's a lovely, humble woman. And she always says God bless to me when we say goodbye. But you see, she's normally in the background, no less worthy, but in general we don't see her or her worth. And sometimes heroes are hidden. And it got me thinking about how we consider heroes. And I began thinking again back to my childhood and my dad. And I desperately wanted my dad to be a hero. But as far as I could see, he wasn't. He wasn't one. Certainly not in the mould I understood what a hero should be. He went to work, he came back again, he spent hours studying form for the football pools. Never won. Correction, he won 5 shillings one week. Didn't change our lives though. He liked to sing in the house like his hero David Whitfield. I didn't see a great deal of him. We didn't see a great deal of the men in the family. I mean, I was brought up, I think, mostly by women. And, you know, my dad worked shifts. So sometimes I wouldn't see him for days. And I know that was the experience of lots of children at that time. And, you know, I was no different. But my dad wasn't a hero. So I made up stories about him. It's a lifelong habit. I made up stories about him to tell to the other kids. I told them he was a retired Spitfire pilot, had shot down many German planes in the war and received the Victoria Cross. I even told them that he used to take me for a ride with him in the Spitfire, and he let me take control once or twice. I don't know whether the kids believed me, but I believed it. And that was the important thing. Dad had been in the RAF and he'd reached the rank of corporal, but he was an airframe fitter, not a pilot. And he wasn't old enough to have fought in the war anyway. But what did facts matter when you're trying to make your dad a hero? So fast forward to about 10 years ago, and my dad, then in his 80s, began to have falls at home and was losing his confidence. And he then began to lose the use in his hands, and then it got progressively worse until he was completely paralysed, with just a small amount of movement in one hand and in his neck. And after many misdiagnoses, we went to see a consultant who told us that Dad had compression in his spine. It's something called stenosis, which if caught early enough can be rectified by an operation, but this was far too late. And it was affecting the whole of his nervous system. And the doctor in that consultation very, very gently told us that Dad would never walk again. And then very sensitively, the doctor left us for a few minutes for us to take it in. And we sat there and I said to my dad, you know, how do you feel about that, Dad? That you're not going to be able to walk again? And he said in his East Yorkshire accent, well, son, there's a lot who are worse off than me. And he had to go and live in a nursing home. He was unable to do anything for himself and needed constant nursing care. I think my sister and I found that difficult because I think there was an element of guilt, you know, couldn't we have taken care of him? But we couldn't, given his needs. And the first home he was in, he was really unhappy. He felt isolated. He was the only man in there, and it was a very middle class home, and my dad didn't do middle class. He felt alone there. I remember one time I went there. He was up in his room. He didn't come out of his room. And he was taking this medication, which was giving him some hallucinations, visual hallucinations. And he'd been seeing spiders on the wall a couple of days before, he told me, which I think is a common thing for these types of hallucinations based on the drugs he's taking. And he said to me, there were a donkey in here this afternoon, son. I said, a donkey? And he said, a donkey. So I thought, oh, he's having hallucinations. He's seeing donkeys now, not spiders. So I said, a donkey? Are you sure, Dad? There were a donkey in here this afternoon, son. So I just accepted it. And I said, well, what did you do with it? We just looked at it. And there had been a donkey. They had brought this donkey into the sitting room for the residents to look at and stroke, but my dad just looked at it. That's a bit of an aside, really. Anyway, he was unhappy in this home, and we decided we needed to find a place where he would be happier, and we found this place in Westfield nursing homes at the back of St Thomas's. And when he first went there, they put him at the end of a corridor where there was not much activity and where no one passed. And he was again isolated, and he was slipping into depression, really. And we were so worried about him that we thought we'd made another mistake. Anyway, we spoke with the staff there, and we said, could he go nearer to the centre of things? And when a room became vacant, they moved his room right opposite the nurses' station, which was a hive of activity. And he blossomed. He really blossomed. And as time went on, he became well loved by the staff. They really thought a lot of him. And I understand that. He was a man who respected those who cared for him. He was a man of thank yous, who was grateful for anything anyone did for him. And he took an interest in others' welfare, even in the staff's welfare, even though he could only slightly move his head and just a very small amount of movement in his hands. And he always said there were others worse off than him, echoing that first conversation with the consultant. And you know, it was there I found my hero. He was there all along, but I hadn't eyes to see it. I was looking for the obvious hero, the Spitfire pilot, the Superman, rather than the desperate Dans of this world, more akin to home. So I found my hero, and he was and is, will always remain my hero, someone I grew to love in his last days, with a depth I had no concept of as a child. And Jesus wasn't an obvious hero, was he? In the world's eyes, he was a failure. The world measures success in terms of power and status and wealth. And from these earthly benchmarks of success, Jesus' life ended rather poorly, really, didn't it? There wasn't a parade or a party. Jesus died condemned and accompanied by 2 thieves, was buried in a borrowed tomb. That's not what our world calls success. And today, many walk past him. Many don't give him a thought. Many give him a nod, call him a good man, but no more. Because he's not the obvious hero. Not in worldly terms. But you know, he reconciled us to God, didn't he? And maybe we need to look beyond the obvious. See the depth and strength in apparent weakness, just like I did with my dad. And maybe then we might recognize Jesus and love him and recognize him for what he is. Well, that's another thought for the day. And I hope you find these at least thought-provoking. I enjoy doing them. It's like a connection with you all, even though I can't see you. but I think about you, and I hope to see you soon. Take care, look after yourselves, look for that not obvious hero in your lives, and I'm sure you'll find some heroes there. God bless. Take care. Bye bye.